Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 33 of Journey into Legends. Today I'm going to be reading and reviewing the short story collection, Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina. Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina is a collection of short stories written by various authors centering on the various creatures seen in the cantina scene from A New Hope. I'm super excited to jump into this book. Not only am I looking forward to reading some short stories, I also absolutely love the cantina scene from A New Hope, so I hope this book lives up to my expectations. Without further ado, let's read and review. Alright, so our first short story is called We Don't Do Weddings, The Band's Tale, and this one focuses on Figrin, Dan, and the Modal Nodes, the Cantina Band. Overall, I wasn't a huge fan of this one. Kathy Tyers in first person is a very dull mixture, and it made what would have otherwise been a pretty good story very boring to read. Overall, a disappointing start, but not terrible. Alright, so I've just finished the second short story, which was called A Hunter's Fate, Greedo's Tale, and while I wasn't a big fan of the first story, this one was fantastic. Not only is the story great, but it also completely retextualizes not only the Han shot first scene, but Greedo's character entirely. I always thought Greedo was just a greedy, low-life slimeball without a conscience, but this story turns him into a naive, idealistic kid who got set up and betrayed by another bounty hunter, and I actually ended up feeling bad for him. Overall, I love this one, and it's honestly one of my favorite stories that I've read from the EU thus far. Alright, the third short story we have is called Hammertong, The Tale of the Tonnika Sisters, which centers on the two sisters we see in the cantina. I had a lot of fun with this one. The story was entertaining, the characters were decent, but easily the best part is Timothy Zahn's writing, which always manages to pull me in. An interesting aspect of this story is the introduction of a retcon that the Tonnika sisters we see in the film, the ones we follow in this story, are actually Shada Dukal and Carolee Dulin, two of Zahn's original characters, in disguise. Personally, I'm indifferent to this retcon, though it does add a new perspective to watching the film scene. Actually, my least favorite part of this one was the way it tied into the cantina scene. I thought it was done in a really unnatural and forced way, and I would have preferred if the interactions from the film happened in the background, instead of the connection being shoved down our throats. After all, just because we know how important Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Obi-Wan Kenobi are, doesn't mean these background characters do. Overall, this story was a fun one, but its connection to the cantina scene actually ended up tying it down. Alright, our fourth story is called Play It Again, Figrin, Dan, The Tale of Muftak and Kabe by A.C. Crispin, and this one is about the Talls and the Chadrifan aliens we see in the cantina scene. This one was fine, probably the least remarkable of the stories thus far. I thought the characters of Muftak and Kabe were decent, and I liked how they were both orphans who were abandoned on Tatooine, and I really liked Muftak's search for clues about his species. Other than a little section at the end of them robbing Jabba's townhouse, the plot was rather thin. We kind of just follow them as they're going about their lives. Something I liked in this one that I had an issue with in the previous story was how it tied into the scene from the film. This one felt a lot more natural and didn't treat Luke, Han, and Obi-Wan as anything more than a few anonymous strangers in the cantina. That's all I really have to say about this one. It's not bad, it's not great, it's just fine. Alright, our fifth story is called The Sandtender, The Hammerhead's Tale by Dave Wolverton, and it involves the Hammerhead from the cantina scene, an Ithorian named Moma Nadan, and I actually really enjoyed this story. I really liked Nadan's affinity for plant life and his attempts to actually plant trees and plants on Tatooine. I thought that was a really cool element to his character. Overall, the story itself was nothing special. It just dealt with Nadan encountering an Imperial captain from his past and struggling with the temptation for revenge. I like the issue this brought up of morality and if revenge is a morally just cause. This story wasn't amazing by any means, but it was enjoyable enough for me. Alright, our next story is called Be Still My Heart, The Bartender's Tale by David Bischoff, and it centers on the cantina bartender Wooher. This one was probably my least favorite thus far, which is really disappointing as I was looking forward to this one quite a bit. First off, Wooher's characterization was extremely disappointing. His distaste for droids is explained in this story, and I was expecting some sort of traumatic experience involving droids, similar to what we see in the Mandalorian show, but instead, the explanation is just that Wooher bullies droids to bolster his self-esteem. okay, and his change of heart came out of nowhere and was quite forced. Another issue I had with Wooher was simply the way he was portrayed. The way he talks, the way he thinks, it just didn't feel like Wooher. And then my final complaint about this story was David Bischoff's writing. I am not a fan of his writing style. Somehow his prose is simultaneously childish, yet obnoxiously verbose, and it felt very amateurish. Other than those things, overall, the story was fine, nothing special, although the way Wooher turns Greedo into a drink for Jawa was very cool. Alright, the seventh story we have is called Nightlily, the Lover's Tale, and it focuses on another alien from the Cantina scene. This time, it's a Godel named Feltapern Travag. I was not looking forward to this story for one reason. It's written by Barbara Hambly, who of course is the author of both Children of the Jedi and Planet of Twilight. Luckily, her writing here was much more tolerable than it was in her adult novels. Overall, this one was fine. The way it tied into the Cantina scene by use of Feltapern's sensory abilities was neat, and I liked the ending of this story when, while making love, Feltapern's mate kills him as part of a mating ritual. It was a really dark and bizarre twist that I think worked really well. The thing that holds this story back from being one of my favorites is Hambly's erotic writing. While her prose was better than expected, the contents of it were far too sexual, making this story a bit uncomfortable to read. Other than that, it's a fun enough story with a neat ending. Alright, the next story is called Empire Blues, The Devaronian's Tale by Daniel Keyes Moran, and this one of course focuses on the Devaronian, whose name is Labria. I actually really enjoyed this story. Unlike the band's tale, I had a lot of fun with the first-person perspective on this one, and Labria's characterization was easily my favorite part of this story. Instead of going the predictable route and making the devil-inspired alien an evil mercenary or something, they made him a jizz enthusiast, which was an unexpected and really neat direction to take his character. Overall, the writing was great, the story was great, and the characterization was great, making this one of my favorites thus far. Alright, our next story is called Swap Meet the Jawa's Tale by Kevin J. Anderson, and this one is about a Jawa named Het I really enjoyed this one simply because of its exploration of Jawa culture. I liked how it tied into the film scene and specifically how it portrayed Obi-Wan, and this one ended on a nice cliffhanger that I'm actually excited to see resolved. Overall, this was one of the simpler stories so far, but one of my favorites nonetheless. Alright, the 10th story we have is called Tradewinds the Ranat's Tale by Rebecca Moesta, and this one is about a Ranat named Rigesk. This one was extremely uneventful, but it was extremely short as well. Honestly, the only thing worth talking about is that this story ties into the Jawa's tale, with the last story ending with the cliffhanger of Het firing at a Stormtrooper squad. This one ends with the revelation that Rigesk actually took the power pack out of Het's blaster, so I'm still excited to see how this will all play out and if Het will make it out alive. Other than that, however, this one had nothing substantial going on. Alright, our next story is called When the Desert Wind Turns, The Stormtrooper's Tale by Doug Beeson, and this one follows a stormtrooper named Davin Felth from his recruitment into Imperial service to him being stationed on Tatooine. This one was possibly my favorite thus far. It offered such a fascinating window into the life of a stormtrooper. It tied together so much continuity, showing the massacre of the Jawas, the execution of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, and even picking up the cliffhanger of Het story. Davin Felth was a really cool character, and I would have loved to see his character go on to join the rebellion. Who knows, maybe he did. Alright, our 12th story is called Soup's On, The Pipe Smoker's Tale by Jennifer Roberson, and this one was one of my least favorites thus far. I found the writing obnoxiously verbose, making it extremely boring to read. The other reason, the biggest reason why I didn't like this story very much, was because there was absolutely no story being told here. It follows the Anzat Danik Jericho as he walks through the streets, sits at a bar, drinks a glass of water, and smokes a pipe. The story wastes all of its time rambling on about how certain brains taste, which Cantina patrons' brains would taste good, which would taste bad, and it ends with Jericho telling himself that he's going to eat Han Solo's brain soup. Absolutely nothing happens. The only redeeming quality for this one was that it had a sort of eerie vampire vibe about it that I found enjoyable, but the author did nothing interesting with it. Alright, our next story is called At the Crossroads, The Spacer's Tale by Jerry Oltian, and it follows the spaceman Boshek. This one was fine. I enjoyed the story this one told about Boshek being inspired by Obi-Wan to be a better person, but the main issue I have with this story is that Boshek is kind of a Gary Stu. Not only did he beat Han Solo's Kessel Run record, but he's also a bit Force-sensitive, which was used in a fun way within the story, but it felt like a weird direction to take the story. My favorite part of this one was the ending, where Boshek is stopped by a Stormtrooper patrol. He reaches out with the Force, and the Stormtrooper captain repeats the dialogue from the mind trick scene in A New Hope, as if Obi-Wan still has a hold on his mind. I thought that was some pretty clever writing. Overall, the story was fun, despite Boshek being a bit of a Gary Stu. Alright, so the 14th story is called Dr. Death, The Tale of Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba by Kenneth C. Flint, and I wasn't a huge fan of this one. First off, this one doesn't even tie into the cantina scene, the only connection being that it follows the characters Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba. The story here was fine, and it had some Frankenstein vibes. It just wasn't as interesting as I was expecting, and the ending didn't do a good job of clarifying Ponda Baba's fate. I reread it a few times, and I still can't tell if he's dead or alive. Overall, a fine story, just not what I was expecting. Alright, the penultimate story is called Drawing the Maps of Peace, The Moisture Farmer's Tale by M. Shane Bell, and it follows a moisture farmer named Eric Johnson who's trying to find a way to unite the different species of Tatooine, including the farmers, the Jawas, and the Tuskens. Ultimately, due to the stubbornness of the farmers, the cruelty of the Tuskens, and the interference of the Empire, Johnson's efforts are unsuccessful, and the story ends with him planning to join the rebellion. Overall, I love this story. I think the idea of uniting the different tribes of Tatooine is a smart idea for a story, and I really enjoyed the way this story portrayed life on Tatooine, for not only the farmers, but the Jawas and the Tuskens as well. This is definitely one of my favorites thus far. Alright, finally we have our 16th and final story, titled One Last Night in the Mos Eisley Cantina, The Tale of the Wolfman and the Lamproid, by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens, and this one follows the Wolfman Lax Sivrak and the Lamproid Dice Ibagon, and this is one of the weirdest, most random stories I've read in the EU yet, and I absolutely loved it. Basically, this one actually takes place during the Battle of Endor, as Lax Sivrak's X-Wing is crashing to the surface of Endor, and he has a sort of flashback dream sequence where he's back in the cantina reliving the moment where he met Dice Ibagon, and they fell in love. He then flashes back to the Battle of Hoth, where Dice died, and then finally the story picks up with Lack walking through the Endor forests during the victory celebrations, and he's reunited with Dice, and it turns out that he died during the crash, and now he's a Force ghost, I guess? This story was super weird, very confusing, and it was an extremely random direction to take these characters, but I loved every minute of it. I love the ambiguity, I love the mysticism and the mystery, I love that the authors took a chance, and in my opinion, it paid off. This story was beautifully written, and it ended up being my absolute favorite from the entire book. So I had a lot of fun with this book. I think the concept of this book is really clever, and I love how the stories tied into each other and the film. The quality definitely varied from story to story. Some were fantastic, some weren't, but overall I really enjoyed this book, and I'm going to give it an 80%. As a bonus, I also decided to read the comic Tales from Mos Eisley. This comic is completely unrelated to the book, but because of the similar title, I decided to review this as well. This comic includes 3 short stories, the first of which is called Light Duty. This one follows a mercenary named Garv as he recounts a time when he was hired to watch over an imperial penal colony called Jellyfish Cove and had to defend his lighthouse from these weird monsters that would turn into statues from the sunlight, but at night or on a foggy day, they would disguise themselves as beautiful women and try to seduce him. It was a decent story, and I enjoyed the subtle horror vibes it had. The next story is called Mostly Automatic, and it follows an old man named Tem Chesko as he tells his life story, one in which he's stranded on a ship for over 60 years. During that time, Tem is accompanied by a service droid named Millie. Before they're able to make it back to civilization, Tem's health starts to fail, and at the end of the story, he opens his shirt and it's revealed that Tem's organs had been replaced by cybernetics made from Millie's circuits. This was a really fun one, and I really liked the plot twist at the end. The last story from this comic is called Heggs's Tale, and it of course follows a man named Sam Heggs, who recounts the tale of how he went hunting for grumph eggs. On a random ice planet, he found a nest of some, and as he went to grab a few, a jungle randomly appeared in front of him, and he saw a young man being chased by a massive grumph. Trying to save the young man, he realized that his blaster shots went right through the grumph, and he recognized it as a rip in the fabric of time. He goes to destroy the eggs, which erases the grumph monster from existence, and he saves the young man, who turns out to be him from the past. This one was a really weird and unique story. I'm not a fan of time travel shenanigans in the Star Wars universe, but in a harmless little comic like this, I thought it was a lot of fun. Overall, this is a really fun, short little comic, and I definitely recommend it. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video where I'll be reviewing another short story collection, Tales from Jabba's Palace. See ya.